all about writing with Ben and Sara.
Welcome to All About Writing, the podcast that covers everything about the world of writing from the inside out. This is episode 37, part 7, on our series on the business of writing. I'm Sara, here with my co-host Ben, who is an award-winning best-selling author and ghostwriter, editor, and publisher.
And I'm Ben, here with my co-host Sara, who is an award-winning best-selling author, screenwriter, editor, and TED Talk presenter. And those are our real names, but today we're going to talk about pseudonyms and whether as an author do you want to use your real name or maybe use another name. So there's a couple of things to think about here. Sara, do you want to kick us off?
Well, I think the first thing to ask yourself is, why do you want to use a pseudonym, if you want to use a pseudonym? And sometimes people do it because professionally they don't want their professional name to be confused. Like if someone's Googling them and they want them to find them on LinkedIn as their job at a hospital or something important. But on the side, they write, murder mysteries, and they don't want those two things to get mixed up or to mess up their Google search for their name, things like that. Other times people do it because they're writing in a genre that they are embarrassed to be associated with. This was common for a long time. It probably still is. And another reason that actually very recently my agent has brought up using a pseudonym is because if you switch genres, sometimes if it's such a huge shift, your readership will struggle and you might lose a lot of them. So for me, because I write primarily historical fiction, I've been working on a fantasy series in conjunction with some other IP that I've sold to a production company. And it's such a huge change from my previous novels that my agent is concerned that there will be some dissonance and I will lose my dedicated readers and struggle to find my new readers because they're going to Google me and find out that I write historical fiction. So why should I read this fantasy book? And so, but at the same time, then you lose all your readership and you start out with zero. So there's so much to take into account with pseudonyms. What do you think, Ben?
Yeah, I think you've definitely hit on some of the good reasons why to use a pseudonym. Big one, yeah, if you're changing genres and you're known for writing one kind of book and now you're writing another kind of book, if you are so famous that everybody knows your name, then you can probably get away with keeping your name and writing somewhere else because your fans are going to follow you anyway. But for most of us, we're not that famous. And so we do suffer from the risk of alienating our existing fan base. But thankfully, our fan bases aren't so big that we can't start fresh with a new fan base by using a pseudonym. So definitely, if you're in, like most of us, that kind of middle ground where, yeah, I have a fan base, but they like me for doing this. I'm going to make a new fan base over here. Great time to use a pseudonym. I love your example for the as a professional wanting to keep your personal brand away from your author brand. I loved your example that if you work in a hospital and you write horror books, I love that. You can
Yeah.
imagine going to the patient and you meet the nurse and oh, you're Stefana King, are you? Yes, I'll be taking care of you today.
Yeah.
That would be awesome. I love that. So that's a great idea. We should encourage one of our nurse friends to become a horror uh, writer. Um, Another reason why you might want to consider a pseudonym is if what you're writing is controversial or potentially dangerous to you. Uh, Absolutely. So for people from some parts of the world, or even some corners of the world we know, you might legitimately think that if I write this, there's going to be some people that I know who I'm going to be making mad, and I want to avoid that. So that is definitely another reason if you want to keep distance between your regular life and your author life, consider a pseudonym. And finally, sometimes certain genres just need a certain kind of name, you know, and maybe your name just doesn't really fit it for whatever reason. And I'm not going to name any genres in particular, but There are definitely some who benefit from having a very bougie name, or a very overly sophisticated name, or a name that is just going to evoke images of the kind of writing that you do. So definitely another reason to use a pseudonym.
Do you want to know what my husband once told me is how I should pick my pseudonym?
Mhm.
He said that you should just use your porn name. And I was like, "Excuse me? Um, I don't actually have one of those." And he goes, "Everybody has one of those." And I said, "What?" And he goes, "It's the name of your first pet and the street you lived on when you were born." Did you
Okay.
know this then?
Well, I've heard a few variations of it, but that's a
Oh,
good one. So in that case, what would your porn name be?
well, my first bunny was named Red Eye,
Hmm.
and my street I was born on was Stevens.
Red Eye Stevens. That's pretty good, actually. Red Eye Stevens. Another variation I've heard is your first pet name and your mother's maiden name. Uh, my wife's porn name under that would be Pussy Down.
That's a perfect
So yeah,
name for a
sometimes
specific
it's all
genre.
right. Yeah,
Yeah.
sorry, we're gonna have to click the explicit content on this one, but
Yeah, make a note. No, um um so I mean, you can have fun with a pseudonym too, and
mhm,
make for a good time or make something really catchy. I'm reminded actually of I forget what one it was, maybe Lethal Weapon 4 maybe, or 3,
sure.
um, and how they kept talking about these, like, very raunchy books that everybody was reading, and they were making all this big deal, and she was so rich, and they couldn't figure out how the one main Danny Glover's character had all this extra cash, and it's because his wife was the raunchy, like, author, but she was using a pseudonym
Yep.
because her husband was a cop, and and again there was that combination. I do think safety is something more and more, and it's something we should probably address. Safety is becoming um a big part of your name on a book cover, and it doesn't even have to be political or controversial so much
Mhm.
as even in this day and age. I think we should address that when we're talking about scary stuff, it doesn't just mean politics or anything like that. It also means that the industry looks at your book, and we've seen this happen to authors where they write something wonderful, but the industry or the general public thinks that they weren't, quote, the right person to write that story. And
Mhm.
not that a pseudonym will protect you from that happening, because there's so much transparency in this day and age that you're never going to escape who you are, and you don't want to lie about who you are. That's even worse. But sometimes maybe using your mother's last name as opposed to your father's, because it will lend credibility and kind of stave off that hostility. So,
Mhm.
just for example, let's say you write a story about something in Africa, right? And your mother or had her maiden name was from that country because you are part of that heritage, and your father's name is very American or very English. You might want to use your mother's last name just to help slide the conversation to the yes, I can tell this story.
Mhm.
Because we've seen so much vitriol spilled on authors who people say, you're not the right one to write this story. This isn't your life experience. You don't have a voice in this space, because it's not a life you've lived. And take that for what you will. People have opinions about whether that should be the way things go or not. But right now, that is something as an author we have to take into account.
Mhm. Absolutely, yeah. So certainly the genre that you're writing in may have expectations from its readership, and that can be in fiction and nonfiction. So I guess as an author, be mindful of that, and for a variety of reasons, you can certainly consider using a pseudonym. Um, and I just so I'm clear, I have no real sort of opinion on whether it's a good idea or a bad idea to use a pseudonym. I don't think one is better or worse. I happen to like my name, and I think that it kind of works well looking on the cover of a book. And my mom was sure happy that I use my full name as an author. I usually just go by Ben, but when I was Bennett R. Coles, yes, made my mom very happy. So I don't want anyone to think that we're saying you should or shouldn't use a pseudonym. It's entirely based on the circumstances that you find yourself in.
Yes, that's the best message to take away from what we're trying to say is, you need to go in knowing that there's a lot of reasons why someone might choose one and why they might not. And I think though we've kind of touched on all the major ones and everybody's situation is going to be different, like you said, but there is no right or wrong. There's only pros and cons. And
Yeah.
you just need to, as yourself, decide what outweighs the other.
Yeah. One other curious thing that I've seen in the industry in the last couple of years is the big publishers have a real interest in new voices.
Hmm.
They have less of an interest in established mid-list authors. And so if you're one of those authors, you've got, a good, clutch of books out, 5 or 6 books, and they've sold okay, like well enough that you're a respectable mid-list author. I've found that a lot of publishers aren't interested in that anymore. They just want the next blockbuster. The next bestseller is what they want. And if your sales record is, it's okay. Whereas, years ago, that would have been great. Nowadays, it's not good enough. My agent actually has advised me and other authors sometimes, have you considered using a pseudonym for your next book? Because that way he can pitch them as, new author, no track record. Who knows what potential you have with this author? So, I mean, in case anyone can't read between the lines, I'm a solid mid-list author, so which I'm quite happy with, and my agent's quite happy with. But he just knows that sometimes publishers, they want even established authors, you know what, use a pseudonym because then we can kind of pitch you as somebody new and fresh,
Right.
which is crazy. And we're frankly pulling our hair out about that. But there's another reason why you might want to use a pseudonym because the industry wants new and fresh.
And that's
And
actually a really good point because that's something I have not heard yet about the industry shifting towards that. But there's so many people out there I read on threads and everything that they're like, I have all these books and they've sold so well on Amazon and I'm self-published and I'm writing my next book and I'm gonna start putting it out on sub and see if I can get any nibbles. And maybe what's actually hurting them is the fact that they do have all these relatively, well performing or steady performing other books out there linked to their name. So, it's
yeah.
interesting the games we play in this industry.
Yeah, so just I'm throwing it out there for our listeners. That is another factor that might come into play. If you have yet to publish a book, well, then don't worry about it.
Right, right.
Just use your name, use another name, doesn't matter. But for anyone perhaps who's out there who does have a few published books and is wondering, why am I not getting the calls like I used to? That might be why. So maybe the next series you launch, try it with a pseudonym, see what happens. Who knows? Can't hurt.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Excellent. All right. I think we've touched it. So thank you for listening and thank you for joining us. That's our show today, everyone. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on any of our chats and tidbits and nuggets of advice like this. Feel free to leave a review too, please. It really helps us a ton. If anyone is looking for help in getting their book ready for the world, or perhaps someone to bounce ideas off of whether or not you should use a pseudonym, we recommend our friends at Cascadia Author Services, and you can find them at cascadiaauthorservices.com. And you can catch up with Ben at bennettrcoles.com as well as on Facebook and Instagram.
And you can find Sarah at sarahdahlman.com and on Instagram. Thanks for joining us today. Please reach out if there are any topics you'd like us to cover, and we'll see you again when we next chat all about writing.
This has been All About Writing with Ben and Sara.